Jesus, lover of my soul. Jesus, I'll never let you go. You've taken me from miry clay, set my feet upon a rock, and now I know I love you. I need you. Though my world may fall, I'll never let you go. My Savior, my closest friend, I will worship you until the very end. Until the very end. And Jesus, lover of my soul. Jesus, I will never let you go. And taking me from the miry clay, set my feet upon a rock, and now I know I love you. I need you. Though my world may fall, I'll never let you go. My Savior, my closest friend, I will worship
Hello.
until the very
Okay, good evening, guys.
Jesus. Jesus.
Hello. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's great just to see many people here tonight. And it's interesting to see a lot of younger people here. It's very encouraging. It's very encouraging to see you guys being hungry for the faith and hungry for the truth. So welcome. And then also tonight, I think we've got a whole bunch of people online. So welcome to all of you guys. I think there are people from Port Elizabeth, but also definitely outside of Port Elizabeth. And so we'd just like to welcome all of you to tonight, which is Citywide Apologetics. Actually, wider than Citywide Apologetics tonight. Okay. So, yeah, apologetics is really all about a defense, a reasonable defense of our faith. And that, even although we have what we call a faith, which is, believing in what we cannot see, it doesn't mean that there's no evidence for it. And so that's what tonight is all about. And so let's just open in prayer, and we trust that the Lord would really just equip us tonight. So when we leave here, we'd feel like our faith is built up, and it's backed up by real solid evidence. Okay. So, Lord Jesus, we just want to thank you. Thank you, Lord, that you were a real man who really walked this earth. Not just a legend. And Lord, you really did die. And then you really did rise up from the dead. And you were raised. And you ascended into heaven. And that's where you are right now. And we want to thank you, Lord, for your spirit that is here. And I pray, Lord, that tonight that you would speak into the hearts of every believer that's here. Lord, of every person that's watching. Lord God, and that you would solidify our faith, Lord. And give us answers, Lord, to the questions that many on the outside are asking, Lord God. Lord, to strengthen us in our belief as well. In Jesus' name. Amen. So it's very exciting to be here. And tonight, Craig is going to be leading us in this. Just so that you all know who Craig is. Craig Crummick is married to Lisa. They've got 3 children. And Craig is an elder with us in Oxygen Life in the Warmer AM congregation. And Craig has been part of Oxygen Life since it first was planted 20 years ago. I think it's in the 20th year now. And so Craig is I've always known Craig to be a rock solid pillar. He's on my eldership team, and Craig is a man of wisdom. So I'd just like to say that Alan is also a part of our eldership team. You know, he can you can say it with me, that when we're sitting around the elders' meetings, when Craig has something to say, we really value what he has to say because there's a real gift of wisdom on his life. So, and I believe that it's that as well, that as he speaks, you'll hear that wisdom coming out. And then I think, Craig, your own love for apologetics has just been something that God has put in you. I know Craig reads very widely, and he does a lot of his own research, and so he's well versed, in a sense, in this topic. And so we just would love to hear from you. Craig, come and tell us more about just the truth that's out there. Amen.
Shot, Vinny. Hello, everyone. So it's great. It would be good. It's fun to have a bit of interaction and, to chirp and no whistling. But, and I imagine all the young guys are here and all the old guys are online, that the guys are dialing in. I know that, just to be aware, that Omicron is still around or is around. And it is new. It's the new kid on the block. So let's just be aware of that. Just follow the normal COVID protocols and things like that. So, as Vince said, that, faith is actually the Greek word. Who knows what the Greek word for faith is in the Bible? Let's see. You're not allowed to answer, Alan. Who knows? Some of these young guns. Okay. The Greek word, I bet you the oaks are shouting out in the cameras here now. But the Greek word for faith in the Bible is the Greek word pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S. And what it literally means, it's not a blind faith. It's not like I hope it's true. The pistis carries the thing of that it's persuaded by evidence. It's a persuasion. And it's actually in a legal sense, where almost like in a court of law, where a jury listening to the evidence is being persuaded. It's like Paul, where Paul says that I am persuaded that neither death nor life, angels nor demons would separate me from the. It's that it carries that connotation to it, that our faith is not a blind leap into the dark, but it's a step of understanding into the light. And that obviously, if it's true, then a lot of evidence and the evidence would support it, eh? Who was at the last apologetics that happened last year before COVID got us? And we had the lockdowns. And in that session, we looked at the Bible, and we looked at the manuscript evidence. We looked at the historical evidence, the scientific evidence. We looked at the prophetic evidence of the Bible, the unique influence that the Bible has had on the world. And then we looked at the structure of the Bible. And I actually said at that conference, I said, the next one we're doing the following term, I wanted to get into some sciencey type things, and then COVID hit. And here we are, almost 2 years later. So I'm very excited about the topic tonight. And we're looking at evidence for God's existence. Now, this is a very broad topic. So we could spend probably a whole year even just unpacking these things, which we can't do in one night. So I'm wanting to take us through just a high level, and just to really whet our appetites and hopefully build our faith tonight as we look at these evidences. And then next year, I'm wanting to spend the whole year. So we're going to be doing apologetics every term. We'll get a lot more into the science, the creation, evolution, age debates, carbon dating, all of that type of thing, dinosaurs, the flood, what is the evidence around all these things? And we're going to start to hit that next year. But tonight we're looking at arguments, and 3 arguments, and if we've got time at the end, I'll throw in a 4th one, because there are actually quite a few. But I'm hitting 3 of the bigger ones and the more well-known ones. So when people approach this topic, and actually any topic, they approach it on the basis of a belief system called their worldview. Who's heard of worldviews? So everybody cares. It's like the glasses that you see everything through. So, when a Christian or a creationist sits and looks at a fossil, and an evolution atheist dude looks at a fossil, they come to different conclusions. They're looking at the same evidence, the fossil, but they come to different. They say, well, look what the flood did, Well, buried, and the other guys are saying, look what happened over billions of years, etc. So worldview is very important. And when you are looking at a worldview, there's 4 questions that you need to ask. And every philosophy in the world tries to answer these questions. And they're kind of the big questions, is who am I? and what am I worth? And that kind of speaks to your identity. It speaks to your personhood. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? Hey, these are kind of the 4 big questions of life that everybody settles. If you don't have these things settled, then you kind of drift. You kind of don't know where you land. You struggle to make, you live without purpose, live without vision. You don't know who you are. And there's 2 ways to actually look at this. There's, as I said, a naturalist worldview and a supernaturalistic worldview. These are kind of the only 2 worldviews. It's either everything's natural or materialistic, or it's supernatural. And they are completely opposite. Because if naturalism is true, can you guys see the yellow? Is it? I think you see it better on that one than this one. If naturalism is true, then the answer to who am I is you actually nobody. And you're worth nothing. You're just a part of the kind of the animal life cycle, a part of the evolutionary life cycle, and you're actually a part of the problem, actually, because you're using up resources on the planet. You're breathing air, you're using up water, and actually, and under a naturalistic worldview, you're not worth very much. Where did you come from? A big cosmic burp about 4.6 billion years ago. Why are you here? There's no purpose, no rules, as we'll look at now, because under the naturalistic worldview, there's no objective moral values. There's no objective morality. Who makes the rules? C.S. Lewis said that if you're going to call a line crooked, you've got to have some idea of a straight line. Otherwise, it's crooked compared to what? So, and then where am I going when I die? You're just going to get recycled back to dirt. Whereas if supernaturalism or creation is true and God exists, then who am I? Is that you're the apple of God's eye. You're created for intimate relationship with Him. Where did I come from? God's preordained will and plan. He knew you before the creation of the world. He already saw you because He's omnipresent and He spans all of time and space. Why am I here? Is that you're here for intimacy with God. You're here to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Is it Westminster Abbey? Alan, you would know. The chief end of man is to enjoy Him forever, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Eh? It's the Westminster Catechism, I think. And where am I going when I die? Eh? Where are we going when we die? Under the supernatural view, where God exists, you're going to heaven, to paradise. And these views are completely opposite. So this is also, I'm kind of also doing a prep for what we're going to get into next year. But if evolution's true, then you started out as an amoeba, and everything's supposedly getting better and better and better, because we're evolving into better. But under the biblical view, everything was created perfect in the beginning, and then sin came in, and now everything's headed down, and we're headed towards the destruction of this earth and the heavens and the earth, and a new heaven and a new earth. So a guy named William Provine, a very, very well-known neo-Darwinist, and he said this around the fact that if naturalism is true, naturalistic evolution, and everything that comes with that is true, he says that if it's true, that means that there's no God, there's no life after death, there's no foundation for right and wrong, there's no meaning in life, and there's no free will, because you're just a part of this cycle of, that actually it's the chemicals in your brain that are determining how you are, how you act, and you have no free will ordained by God. So that's quite an admission, by a neo-Darwinist. So there's a number of ways to approach this issue, and this is what apologetics is all about. This is why we do apologetics. And so I want to look at 3 arguments, as I said, hopefully a 4th one. And we're going to get into looking and seeing how these arguments. So these are within the arguments there is a lot of evidence contained, but these are arguments that we can use to persuade people that God exists. So the first one we're going to look at is the argument from causality, which is also called the cosmological argument. Then we're going to look at the argument from design, which is also called the teleological argument. And then we're going to look at the argument from morality, which is also called the moral argument. All right, so let's go. So firstly, let's look at what makes a good argument. So who's done philosophy here? Who studied philosophy? All right. So this might, you might be, hopefully you're nodding when I'm saying this, but what makes a good argument? So when you make an argument, you don't have to prove the conclusion of your argument with 100% certainty. But your argument needs to meet three conditions. And they are this, is that firstly, they need to obey the rules of logic. So your argument must make sense. Eh? Yes? Your argument must make sense. It means that the conclusion must flow logically from your premises. So you're saying, if this is true, then this must be true. And that is what makes a good argument. And as I've argued before, there's a book written by Richard Dawkins called The God Delusion. And he tries to use an argument like this to prove that God doesn't exist. And he completely messes up the whole idea behind what makes a good argument, because his conclusion doesn't flow. He kind of makes some arguments, and then he comes to the conclusion that therefore God doesn't exist. And everyone is kind of taken left field. What? How did you get to that from there? Doesn't make sense. So firstly, it must obey the rules of logic. Secondly, its premises must be true. Okay? So the if statements must be true. And then the premises must be more plausible than their opposites, their negations. So in other words, they just need to be more possible than their opposites to make a good argument. And these are the arguments that we're going to go through tonight for God's existence. Everyone with me, eh? All right. Argument from causality. We'll go till about 8 o'clock. Then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and go till about 9. All right. So the argument of causality is something that is known very well by all of us. It's the universal law of cause and effect. Eh? The cause produces the effect, and the effect cannot exist without the cause. And there's 12 universal laws of the universe that they call. There's 12 laws of the universe, and this is one of them, the law of cause and effect. So the snow results in, and then some intelligence behind the snow and utilizing the snow produces the snowman. But without the snow, you can't have the snowman. So it's just a kind of an illustration of that the one causes the other one. And some of the stuff we're going to look at tonight, guys, we're going to be going like, but this is like so obvious. It is obvious, but it's actually then not that obvious to some. So if you have an accident, that is a car accident would be the effect of something. Something caused you to have that accident. And that could be possibly, typing on your cell phone while you're driving or driving drunk. But there's a cause. There's a cause behind that effect. What cause? Either you were speeding, or when they examine, when you get to a court of law, the question they ask is why. That's one of the motive. Is one of the big sort of questions. Why did this happen? How did this happen? And they're saying what they're trying to do is to find the cause that produced this effect. And if you're walking around with your shoelace untied, it's going to produce an effect. You're going to end up tripping. So the cause is that an effect cannot exist without a cause. And actually, under the universal law of cause and effect, is that the cause cannot exist without producing that effect. And that's going to come into play as we look at this argument later around why this is such a powerful argument for God's existence. Is that a cause will produce effect. So in this case, what we're going to be looking at tonight is the cause of everything. We're not looking at the cause of an accident. It's just what caused everything to come into existence. What is the first cause? They call it the first cause of everything else. The uncaused cause that caused everything else to come into being. What is that? And that is a question that philosophers and scientists and theologians have landed there. But what is that first cause? And so one of the cause would have to produce these three things. It would have to produce time. I did have animations, but we are using new software, so my animations are not coming in at a click. But it would produce time, it needs to produce space, and it needs to produce matter. So time, space, and matter have to come into existence. And they have to come into existence at the same time. Because if you have matter without time, when do you put it? If you have matter without space, where do you put it? Okay? So you have to have time, and God answers that in one sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens. In the beginning, time, God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. He created time, space, and matter. And what's also interesting is that when you look at the word universe, what does universe mean? It's a single spoken sentence. It's a uni is a single, and a verse is a spoken sentence. Okay? How's that? All right, so, and we're going to look tonight at that first cause. Who was that first cause? So the cosmological argument goes as so. It states this. It says, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. So this is the cosmological argument. Some call it the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Nothing can begin to exist unless something causes it to begin to exist. And then premise number 2 is that, well, the universe began to exist. Therefore, if those two are true, your conclusion is that, and your inescapable conclusion is that the universe must have a cause. And once you get to the conclusion that the universe had a cause, you begin to analyze, and you can say, okay, cool. Let's look at the properties, and let's look at the universe, because you can look at something of the effect, tells you something about the cause. And we'll get into that just now. All right. It's also, as I said, also called the Kalam cosmological argument for God's existence. Sorry, I had a blank slide in there. So G.W. Leibniz, a philosopher, said, why is there something? He asked the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Philosophers sit and think about these things. Okay? Why is there something rather than nothing? I must be honest, before I started reading these guys, I never ever thought about that at all. But I'm going, it's true. Why is there something rather than nothing? Martin Heidegger said, why do we have something rather than nothing at all? So it's not just one guy. There's a bunch of guys that are thinking about this. And these are all like Nobel Prize winning guys. These are all world famous philosophers that sit and talk about this and go, we need an answer to this. So there are 4 possible answers to reality of why we're here. And the one is that reality is an illusion, and we'll unpack these briefly. Reality is either an illusion, so either it's like the Matrix or something, although the Matrix wouldn't make sense because there's something there. There's robots that are. But either it's an illusion, it's self-created, or it's self-existent, or reality was created by something else that is self-existent. All right. So those are the only 4. So let's examine them quickly. Reality is an illusion. So under this one, we don't have to spend too long on this because this one is not really held by many because it's actually really self-defeating. So there's a famous illustration where a student asked a professor and said to the professor, Professor, sitting in the class, Professor, I'm not really sure I even exist. So the professor says to him, who may I say then is asking the question? So if you don't exist, who's asking? So reality being an illusion or a claim that reality is an illusion actually doesn't fit. Because you need to exist to deny your own existence. It's a self-defeating claim that you don't exist and are just an illusion. And honestly, guys, this is something that's put forward as an explanation of reality and why we're all here. So it's, well, we're actually not here. It's okay, well, who's having this conversation if we're not really here? So illusion by definition requires an actor to be having the illusion or the delusion. They require something to experience the illusion. In other words, reality cannot be an illusion. So That's the first one. Reality is not an illusion. The second one, that reality is self-created, that reality kind of created itself. And I think that the Big Bang would fall under this one. Although the Big Bang's not actually an origins theory, because under the Big Bang, the Big Bang states that all the matter and energy in the whole universe was squashed into a little dot the size of like a pencil point, a full stop. So that you had that, and that started to spin and then expanded out, etc. So that's not actually the origin, because now you've got to ask, well, where did all of that stuff come from that's in the dot? And we'll look at that just now. So William Lane Craig says this about self-creation. He says, believing that something can come into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. Because the reason why is because with the magic, at least you've got the magician and the hat to do something, you know. But in this thing, so we'll watch a quick video on this. And just listen to this and we'll go on.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God.
Oh, there you have
The
it.
cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite
All right. All right. Cool, eh? So when they talk about redshift, the way that they measure redshift, we'll get into this next year when you get into the sciencey stuff, but essentially is that when you measure light coming back from an object, so if you shine a torch at something, the light goes onto that object and then comes back into your eye. That's how you see it. Now, if you had to take a torch and shine it at a car that's driving away from you, the light will be slightly redshifted because it's moving away. And this is what Edward Hubble found with the Hubble telescope and all of that, is that they measured the redshift in the light, and they found that there was a redshift in the light, which means that all the planets and galaxies are all moving away from each other, which means the universe is expanding. And that's how we ended up where, all of us learn actually today about the expanding universe, eh? So, so the universe cannot be self-created. Stephen Hawking said this, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. So we're going to see now what nothing means in this case. Because when they talk about nothing, this is what they refer to. This is what they call about the quantum vacuum. But this is a fluctuating soup of energy, gravity, matter. Pretty much everything in the universe was in a state of a quantum vacuum in the beginning. And this is what they give the name nothing to. And that within this exploded and produced the universe. But I would argue that is not nothing. This is nothing. Hello? There's a bit of a delay between this and that. That looks more like nothing, hey? And this is what was in the beginning, because if you're going to hold to the quantum vacuum, you've got to answer the question then, well, where did that stuff come from? Then you're not at the beginning of everything. That stuff then, what caused that to come into existence? So you've got to go back to an uncaused something. And that is the problem, when often you'll hear scientists, and often you'll hear them saying that the universe came into existence from nothing. I've read it in my children's science books. I've heard it on National Geographic. I've heard it on the Discovery Channel many, 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 many times. And often what grates me is that people don't understand this, that when they say nothing, they're not referring to this. They're referring to that quantum vacuum of energy, matter, etc. But actually, we need to answer this question. How did the universe come from that? Absolutely nothing. And one guy I read in the science textbooks, he said, and then the universe got filled with more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. I honestly did read that. So Aristotle said this. He said, nothing is what rocks think about. It's what they dream about. Which is really nothing, because they don't dream about anything. So John Lennox says about Hawking's statement about this, is he says, we're talking about the universe creating itself from nothing. Hawking's argument, so John Lennox, who's heard of John Lennox? He's a very, very famous guy that moves. He's a emeritus professor at Oxford University, and he's debated guys like Richard Dawkins, etc. Highly recommend his stuff. And he said this. He said, Hawking's argument appears to me even more illogical when he says the existence of gravity means the creation of the universe was inevitable. But how did gravity exist in the first place? Who put it there? And what was the creative force behind its birth? So you can't say because gravity exists, the universe can create itself from nothing. Because then you had gravity. That's not nothing. So he says, similarly, when Hawking argues in support of his theory of spontaneous creation, in other words, that it just universe created from nothing, that it was only necessary for the blue touch paper to be lit to set the universe going. The question must be, where did this blue touch paper come from, and who lit it, if not God? So where did the energy, because there's something we'll also look at next year, is that if you look at the universe, if you can imagine, because gravity is measured by the mass of an object between two objects and the distance between them. And the closer you are together, the stronger gravity gets, and the more dense you are, the stronger the gravity, eh? Know that. So now what happens is that there's a thing called the inverse square law, is that if, for example, the moon came half the distance closer to Earth, the gravity force between Earth and the moon would not be doubled. It would be squared, which is far stronger than if it were being doubled. And so on and so forth. Now, just imagine every single particle, matter, energy in the whole universe coming into this little dot. Just imagine how dense that dot must be. Imagine every star, galaxy, sun, moon, everything in the space, the little size of a dot. It's going to be quite squashed in there, eh? That little dot's going to have quite a bit of stuff in there. Imagine how heavy that dot's going to be. And imagine the gravity, because the space between those particles is going to be quite small. It's going to be, you're going to be, so the gravity in there would be close to infinite. Now, just imagine the energy it would need to take to get that thing spinning fast enough to have it break apart. And these are questions the Big Bang can't answer. You know, where did the energy come from that made the thing spin? You know, where, etc. So this is what John Lennox is talking about, is that who lit this, like this blue touch paper, and who provided all the stuff that's in there? Guys with me, eh? All right. And the second problem with self-creation is that a thing cannot be ontologically prior to itself. To create yourself, you must have existed prior to yourself. Eh? Self-creation fails as an explanation because it is analytically and logically false. Sorry, you might not be able to see the red. I'll use different colors on my slides next time. But because it actually doesn't make sense. The universe cannot create itself unless it exists to create itself. So it actually fails logically. Everyone with me, eh? All right. So we have two options left. The one is an eternal universe, which we spoke about. A lot of scientists talk about the steady state theory. The universe is just, or an oscillating universe that it kind of comes in and then expands again and comes in and expands again. Or you have an eternal creator. So let's examine so it says there are not, John Lennox goes on, he says there are not many options, essentially just two. Either human intelligence ultimately owes its origin to mindless matter, or there is a creator. It is strange that some people claim that it is their intelligence that leads them to prefer the first to the second. All right, so why do we think that the universe is not eternal? So we did look at this in the video. The laws of thermodynamics, the expanding universe, the thermodynamics, the first law of thermodynamics states that matter cannot be created or destroyed. Matter or energy cannot be created or destroyed naturally. Obviously, if you have a creator God, he can create stuff out of nothing, but these things cannot just create themselves. And also an expanding universe, thermodynamics, and that we're heading towards what they call the heat death of the universe. That the energy in the universe is running out. And so they powerfully prove it. So you can see here in an MIT Technology Review article, it says, mathematics of eternity prove the universe must have had a beginning. So that's what these guys, in Stephen Hawking, strange enough, in his book, The Beginning of Time, he said this. He said, in this lecture, I would like to discuss whether time itself had a beginning. He says, and whether it will have an end. All the evidence seems to indicate that the universe has not existed forever, but that it had a beginning. In the Harvard House of Science, so in the Harvard University, in their scientific department, they put out an article saying there's scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. As we've seen, the expanding universe that must have started. They call it the singularity, where everything began. So science and philosophy has taught us nothing comes into being without a cause. You know, I'm here because my parents got together. You are here because your parents got together. And everything, we rely on the fact that things don't pop into. Imagine you're sitting on your chair right now and a lion pops into existence right next to you, just there. I mean, we depend on the fact that things don't just pop into existence out of nothing. And that everything that started to exist must have a cause that started that thing to exist. And as I said, it's the universal law of cause and effect. Every cause has an effect. Every effect has a cause. Imagine a great white just popping into existence right next to you while you're surfing, eh? Or a black hole. Imagine a black hole. Boom, just pops into existence, right? Things don't pop into existence out of nothing. There we go. So if the universe had a beginning, then according to the cause and effect law, the universe has a cause because it began to exist. It cannot be eternal. And we'll look a bit now at infinite regress. I'm going to show you a video now about infinite regress. And infinite regress of causes is logically and philosophically and physically not possible. It's an absurdity. Infinity is not a thing. It's a word we use, but you can't really work with it. It's and we're going to look at it now and see why it doesn't work when we start looking at the cause of the universe and looking at, because if the universe has existed into eternity, then we must have an infinite number of cause and effect events that have taken place until now. Now let's watch this video to see why that is not possible.
Did the universe have a beginning? Or has it existed from eternity past? If it did have a beginning, this raises a question. Did the universe have a creator? In part 1, we explored this question scientifically. Now let's look at it philosophically. Aristotle believed the universe was eternal in the past, but Al-Ghazali disagreed. He pointed out that if the universe did not have a beginning, then the number of past events in the history of the universe is infinite. But that's a problem, because the existence of an actually infinite number of past events leads to absurdity. It's metaphysically impossible. Why? The mathematician David Hilbert illustrates the problem by imagining a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all of which are occupied. There's not a single vacancy. Every room in the infinite hotel is full. Now suppose a new guest shows up and asks for a room. The manager says, sure, no problem, then moves the guest who was in room number 1 to room number 2, and the guest who was in room number 2 to room number 3, and so on to infinity. As a result of this shuffling, room number 1 becomes vacant, and the new guest happily checks in, even though all the rooms were already full, and nobody has checked out. And it gets even more absurd. Suppose an infinity of new guests show up at the front desk. No problem, says the manager. Then she moves each person into a room with a number twice that of his own room. So the person who was in room number 1 moves into room number 2. The person who was in 2 moves to 4. The person who was in 3 moves to 6, and so on. Since any number multiplied by 2 is always an even number, all the odd-numbered rooms become vacant, and the infinity of new guests gratefully check in. And yet, before they arrived, all the rooms were already full. It gets even crazier when the guests start to check out. Suppose all the guests in the odd-numbered rooms check out. In that case, an infinite number of people have left the hotel. And yet, there are no fewer people in the hotel. But suppose instead, all the guests in rooms numbered 4 and above check out. In that case, only 3 people are left. And yet exactly the same number of people left the hotel this time as when all the odd-numbered guests checked out. Thus, we have a contradiction. We subtract identical quantities from identical quantities and get different answers. These absurdities show that an actually infinite number of things cannot exist in the real world. Here is a second argument Ghazali offers against a past eternal universe. Suppose that for every 1 orbit Saturn completes around the Sun, Jupiter completes 2. The longer they orbit, the further Saturn falls behind. Now, what if these 2 planets have always been orbiting the Sun from eternity past? Which has completed the most orbits? Strangely enough, the number of their orbits is exactly the same, infinity. But that seems absurd, for the longer they orbit, the greater the difference becomes. If the universe has always existed, then an infinite series of past events has been formed by adding one event after another. It's like a sequence of dominoes, falling one after another until the last domino, today, is reached. The problem is that the final domino could never fall if an infinite number of dominoes had to fall first. So today could never be reached. But obviously, here we are. It's today. So the number of events leading up to today could not possibly be infinite. The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality.
It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play
is solely that of an idea. What objections might be raised to these arguments? Some people object that, unlike the rooms in Hilbert's hotel, the events of the past don't all exist at the same time. But we can easily tweak the story to get rid of this objection. Suppose the hotel has been under construction from eternity past, one room being added each year. How many rooms would there now be in the hotel? An actual infinite number. So if the past is infinite, that would imply that Hilbert's hotel could exist, which is absurd. Others have objected that an actually infinite number of things do exist, namely numbers and other mathematical entities. However, this objection presupposes that numbers really exist, but this is a highly disputed assumption that most philosophers reject. So if Ghazali's two arguments are right, then the universe is not eternal in the past. It must have a beginning. And we know intuitively that whatever begins to exist requires a cause of its existence. Thus, we are led to conclude that the universe has a cause of its existence. So what caused the universe? Atheist Daniel Dennett says, the universe caused itself. But this is incoherent, because in order to cause itself to come into existence, the universe would have to exist before it existed. The cause of the universe must therefore be outside of the universe, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and enormously powerful. Much like God.
Cool stuff, eh? So infinite regress, I thought I could have explained it to you, but this is such a cool video that just gives the visuals. It makes it so much easier to understand, eh? That you cannot have an infinite number of events into eternity past. So therefore, you've got to go back to a first cause. What is it that caused everything else to come into existence? And this is the cosmological argument. So going back in time, the universe has a finite beginning. Scientists call it the space-time boundary, where time began and space began. And the first cause that kicked it off has to be, as we've been hearing, uncaused, infinite, and eternal. Actually, a whole bunch of other things. Because nothing caused it. It must be uncaused. Otherwise, it can't be the first cause. So why I think the universe is not eternal, as we've been saying, if the universe hasn't always existed, then something else must. Because there must be something else that caused the universe to come into existence. The universe can't create itself, and yet the universe is here. Hey? We're all here. And so what was it outside of, as in that video they explained, outside of the universe that caused it to come into existence? So we spoke about the quantum vacuum, as we spoke already, that the quantum vacuum, does it show that things come into existence from nothing? And the quantum vacuum has about 10 different mathematical equations. Nobody knows which one is actually right. Some are fully deterministic, some are indeterministic. I'll explain more of that next year. I can't get into all of that tonight. We will run out of time. But essentially, the quantum vacuum is what I explained, is not nothing. You then have to ask, well, what caused the quantum vacuum to come in? So the quantum vacuum cannot be the uncaused cause of the universe. Yeah, all right. We've spoken about that. As we said, that is not nothing. So the multiverse, we've said, has the infinite regress problem, because and I think I've got a video here that actually talks about this. But if you're going to hold, there's zero evidence for the multiverse. It's just a postulated idea that people have tried to come up with to try and get past the fact that our universe began to exist. So they said, well, what happens if we're just one of many universes? And that we're actually part of a multiverse, and there's an infinite number of universes. You still have your infinite regress problem. You have to go back, well, you can't go back infinite regress into an infinite number of universes. And there's no evidence for it anyway. So, yeah. So Dr. Alexander Vilenkin, he was one of the co-discoverers and that of the expanding universe that they found. And he said this: "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." So all these things that the guys try and throw at this, the multiverse, the quantum vacuum, the eternal, the steady state theory, the eternal universe, it's all what they call in philosophy drowning the fish. Who's heard about that? Drowning the fish. How do you drown a fish? You can pour all the water you want on this thing. You can pour all the stuff, and when you're done, it's still there staring back at you. You haven't solved anything. And spontaneous creation from nothing, quantum vacuums, multiverses, and all these things that they try to throw against the fact that you have to have a first cause is called drowning the fish. So you cannot get away from the fact that this problem exists. So why deny the possibility of God? Stephen Hawking said, many people do not like the idea that time has a beginning, probably because it smacks of divine intervention. And this is why people fight so heavily for this, because they don't want God to exist. So we have to find some way, because if there is a beginning, then we need to explain, well, what caused it to come into existence? And it smacks of divine intervention, especially when you get into some of the other arguments like fine-tuning of the universe and intelligent design and all those things. Dr. George Wald said this thing's a little bit smaller, so the text is quite small here. Let me read it from here. He says, there are only two possibilities to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation, arising to evolution. In other words, it created itself. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility. Spontaneous generation, that life arose from non-living matter, was scientifically disproved 120 years ago by Louis Pasteur and others. And that leaves us with only one possible conclusion, that life arose as a creative act of God. Then listen to what he says here. This guy's not a Christian. He says, I will not accept that philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible. To hold on to something which is not possible because I just don't want to believe in God. I don't want to believe that we're accountable to somebody. And this is an attitude that is often carried when you talk, often carried in the atheistic scientific community, secular science. So, option of a creator. Everyone with me, eh? Everyone good? We're going to take a break now. All right. I know this is a lot of brain activity, eh, that we're having to. We've all come from work and whatever, studies in school. We've got to think about these things now. But this is good. When we sit with people and we can explain logically that it makes sense that God exists. When you examine all these options, why are we here? Why are we here? All right, so the fourth option is that reality was created by something that is self-existent. The universe can't be self-existent. Therefore, it was created by something that is self-existent. What is that? So Bertrand Russell said, he said this, and he was definitely not a Christian. This guy was a proper atheist. He said, if everything must have a cause, then God must have a cause. Eh? Who's heard that argument before? All right. So this is a total logical fallacy, because if you have a God that is not eternal, he's not God. By very definition of God means that he must be eternal and uncreated. And it's like asking, what does the color blue taste like? I don't know. It's a color. Where's the bachelor's wife? It's a logical fallacy. It fails the logic test. If you posit a self-existing first cause, it's philosophically sound because you can't make the unmade. So if people ask you, and this is something that Richard Dawkins speaks about in his book, he says if God exists, you create a bigger problem that you have to solve, because then who caused God? He fails the logic test in his book. I've read his book, and there's a reason why he doesn't want to debate guys like William Lane Craig and that, because that book's been taken apart. I actually did an apologetics a few years ago where we looked at the book and we unpacked what its core statements were. But that book has gone out to hundreds of millions of people. And the amount of people that I've spoken to that have been affected by that book, other books like the Da Vinci Code, and these books that go out there, which are actually, if you scratch a little bit under the surface, you find that it's not true. And the problem is, that's why we do this, eh? We do apologetics. We get ourselves equipped so that we can help people through, do you understand what he's actually saying, eh? All right. And a typical skeptical objection, I've had this sometimes, I thought I'd put this in here. Guys will say, come on, man, a self-existing eternal God, give me a break, man, that's impossible. So then the Christian comeback would be a self-existent eternal universe. Come on, man, give me a break, that's not possible. And it's not just impossible, but it's been proven false, as we've just seen. So you have to go back to an eternal, uncreated, self-existent something, whatever that may be. So if you deny a self-existent, necessary, and eternal creator, you must automatically embrace a self-existing, necessary, and eternal universe, which we've just shown is not true. And that's the admission that guy we just read made. He said, if you follow the evidence, you go back to the fact that there must be a God, but I don't want to accept that, so I'm going to believe what I know is impossible. It's craziness, eh? And we know that every drop of scientific data that we have points to the conclusion that the universe has a beginning. So why is an eternal creator preposterous, but an eternal universe is not? Why are people so ready to embrace an eternal universe, but not embrace an eternal creator, when actually all the logic and the evidence and everything we see points in this direction? Perhaps because an eternal universe is an amoral entity who doesn't hold anyone accountable. So when we look at the first cause, and I'm wrapping up the cosmological argument now, and then we'll go into a break. Oh, I made it red, so you guys are not going to see this. All right, let me tell you, because I can barely see it from here. All right, so what kind of first cause are we talking about here? So the first cause we've heard must be immaterial, eternal. So this is the list. He has to be supernatural in nature because it created the natural. So it's got to be above the natural. It must be powerful, incredibly powerful. The cause must be eternal. It must be self-existent because you cannot have an infinite regress. You've got to go back to something that stops there. And that first cause is eternal. So the first cause must be eternal. The first cause must be omnipresent because he created space. And he created time. So the first cause is not only in this time that we are now, but spans all of time and space, already at the end, already in the beginning. Eh? And space, omnipresent. It must be timeless and changeless because it created time. Cause must be immaterial. It transcends the physical. It must be personal. And that's the one I'm going to unpack now quickly. And personal speaks about having intent. The first cause must be personal. He must be necessary because everything else depends on this cause. Otherwise, without this cause, there would be no us to depend on it. It must be infinite and singular. You can't have two infinites. One singular. It can be a trinity, it's one God, but they must be diverse, yet have unity. The cause must be intelligent, supremely intelligent. I mean, look at the universe. It must be so intelligent. The cause must be purposeful because it deliberately created everything, and we'll look at that one now. The cause must be moral because no moral law would exist without this first cause if it's not moral. And the cause must be caring because no moral laws would have been given if he didn't care if it's just some distant first cause, there'd be no moral laws. There's one place where we find all of these things met. Because now you're starting to look at the effect, and you're saying, if we look at the universe and we look at what is around us, that tells us something about the cause. When you look at the cause, you see these things, that list I just read. Now you go, okay, well, what first cause meets these requirements? And there's only one place in the universe that you find a cause that matches all of this, and that's in the Bible. And you see, God is supernatural. God is powerful. God is eternal. God is omnipresent. And all the scriptures are on the I'll actually send this out to all of you if you guys want. I'll send this to you. He's personal. He's necessary. God is infinite, singular. He's one God, yet he's diverse. He's intelligent, purposeful, moral, and caring. And God fits the criteria. He's the only thing that fits the criteria as the first cause. And then just to close off, is that why do I say that this first cause must be personal? Why must the first cause be personal and purposeful? So the reason why is because it's implied by the fact that the first cause must be timeless, because it created time, and it must be eternal in the past, uncaused, unmade, and immaterial, because it created the material. And there are only two entities that we know of in the universe that have these qualities of being timeless and immaterial. It's only two things we know of. So these things are supposed to come up. So don't read ahead. And those are, the first one is abstract objects like numbers, and the second entity is an unembodied mind or consciousness, like a living mind. And we know that abstract objects don't stand in causal relation to anything. I mean, the number 7 can't create anything. It just is the number 7. Eh? It cannot stand in causal effect on anything. It doesn't cause anything to actually be. Therefore, it stands that the first cause must be a transcendent, unembodied mind or consciousness. And the reason why this is important is because if the first cause is eternal, and he had no control, or that first cause had no control over whether it could produce the effect. Because remember, cause cannot exist without the effect. The cause, if it exists, will produce the effect. Think about a fire. A fire can't help but produce heat. It can't decide when to produce heat. Eh? There's intelligence involved if you want to do that. So the first cause is eternal and sufficient for its existence. So then the question is, why isn't the effect also eternal? If the first cause is eternal, why isn't the universe eternal? Is the penny dropping? Are we getting there? Okay. How can the cause exist eternally, but the effect only comes into existence a short time in the past? The cause existed for eternity, and then at some point, the cause decided to create. The only solution here is that the first cause must be a personal agent endowed with the freedom of the will, who can determine to produce the effect according to his own purpose and intent. The first cause cannot be mindless. It has to have free will to exercise its will to create. And that's called what they call agent causation, because the agent is free and he can initiate new effects as and when he wants. So this is why I say that the first cause must be personal, because he has to have intent. He intended to create. And again, there's only one person we know of from a cause perspective that has that quality, and that is the God of the Bible. Everyone with me, eh? So a finite time ago, God, a creator endowed with freedom of the world, could freely bring the universe into being at that moment. In that way, the creator could exist changelessly and eternally, but create the world with a beginning in time. By exercising his causal power, he brings it about that a world with a beginning comes to exist. So the cause is eternal, but the effect is not. So in this way, and this way alone, it's possible to have an effect with the beginning arise from an eternal cause through the free will of a personal creator. So guys, let's take a break. I think let's just, our brains, just take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll go on. Okay.
Draw me gently to my knees, and I am lost for words, so lost in love. I'm sweetly broken, holy surrender. At the cross, you beckon me now. Draw me gently to my knees, and I am lost for words, so lost in love. Sweetly broken. love truth and love justice, and my fellow man, to steady the weak and the hungry to feed, that Christ might be honored and with me be pleased. For this is the love you have shown, and to love I must echo the love I have known. So I will be faithful to love as required, a love shown by obedience. Lord, I'll be obedient. This is how I love you, giving as I've received, the blessings you've left to others in need, to care for the poor, to free the oppressed, to stand for the orphan and the widow to bless. For this is the love you have shown, and to love I must echo the love I have known. So I will be faithful to love as required, a love shown by obedience. Lord, I'll be obedient, and if I have not love.
Okay, guys, let's start finding our seats again. All right, let's carry on. So, guys, I'm trusting that this is helpful. There is so much more detail that you can actually go into around these things, and I'm trusting that it's also building our faith, and it's as we look at this, and that that's really is. I mean, one of the reasons I got into apologetics was that I was so tired of seeing Christians on the back foot, and I just said I love truth, and I was so tired of seeing just mistruths being blurted out and Christians on the back foot and they can't answer these questions. So I thought, all right, I'm going to get into some of this. This was about 20 years ago, and start researching and whatever, and that was actually my heart, was really to actually equip the saints and equip the church and to build the faith of believers. And then also to help us to be able to stand and give a defense. Paul says that's where the word apologetics comes from. There's two scriptures. Peter and Paul says that all of us must be ready to give a defense for what we believe. And that word defense is the Greek word apologia. That's where the word apologetics come from, for those who thought apologetics was the art of apologizing. It's it's not apologizing. It's giving an oral defense for what we believe. Why do we believe this? All right, so we've been looking at the cosmological argument for God's existence, and it's quite chewy, eh? I always, the thing is where do you pitch this? Do you pitch it more detail, where we try and pitch it is to get our brains to stretch a little bit, to think through this stuff, and yet not lose us in the detail. But I trust it's been clear, man, and I trust that it's been just powerful for us. So we were just before this, we were looking at the fact that God is the only one that fits the definition of the first cause of the universe, that He is the beginning of the universe. He is the one. And when you start to unpack what qualities and properties this first cause must have, only the God of the Bible fits it. And so this guy, Robert Jastrow, who's a NASA scientist, he said this. He said, astronomers now find that they've painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation, to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in the cosmos and on the earth. They have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there is what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. How's that? There are scientists out there going, the fact that God exists is actually a scientific fact now. It's a scientific fact that many scientists don't want to admit. And we'll actually get more into that next year, because one of the things I want to talk about is the consequence of coming into this. I mean, I've just finished reading a book called Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer, who's the head of the Discovery Institute. A brilliant book. Brilliant. It's all about DNA and the origins of how they discovered DNA. And it's a brilliant book, really faith-building. He's a Christian. But the reason I read it was because I was seeing on YouTube, like, hey, there's a whole lot of scientists who are heads of their departments at prestigious universities getting saved through reading this book. So I thought, man, I'm going to read this book. So I got it on loot. I waited 3 weeks. It came. I read this thing. And I can see why they did, because it's actually, you cannot believe. And I want to do an entire evening next year just looking at DNA. It's not the topic tonight, but the information and the proof and the evidence in there is converting secular scientists. And what's happened is that some of these guys have converted, and then they've been ousted out of their departments because it's not what the university holds to, you know what I mean? And so anyway, but we'll get into that. So let's look at some conclusions around this, and then we're going to get into the second argument. I think we're only going to get through the second one. I don't think I'll mention the third one. But so of the 4 options for reality, God is the best explanation. Supernatural creator God is the best explanation for the existence of reality and of the universe. So which is more reasonable to believe? Because so many people call Christians unreasonable. I've heard people have said to me, but God's like a fairy tale, man. He's like Santa Claus. And when you start to scratch under the surface, you see that he's not real. And I'm going, bro, come and scratch under the surface with me, and we'll see. Because it's not unreasonable as we start to unpack this. And he says, what is more reasonable to believe? That an impersonal, non-conscious, meaningless, purposeless, and amoral universe that had its own beginning accidentally created personal, conscious, moral beings who are obsessed with meaning and purpose? Or is it that a personal, conscious, purposeful, intelligent, moral, and eternal God created beings in his likeness and established the universe and its laws to govern their existence? Which is more plausible based on everything that we've just looked at? Eh? And Arno Penzas is a Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist. He said this. He said, the best data we have concerning the origin of the universe are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. It's a biblical worldview. All right. We've already mentioned this one. In the beginning, what, and in the beginning, why? Genesis 1:1 explains the origin of the universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right, so that's the cosmological argument, eh? Lekker. So are we all well-versed in the cosmological? We can remember all the detail? No, don't stress. So I want to say, guys, that if you want to get your hands on this presentation, then just please send an email to admin@oxygenlife.co.za. Sorry, Adele, if you're watching, it's going to come to you. And then Adele will make sure it gets to me. And if you've got any questions out of that as well, or any questions about tonight, you can also drop them to admin@oxygenlife.co.za. Easy, eh? Admin@oxygenlife.co.za. And those will get to me, and I'll do my best to go through them and look at them. And all right, argument number 2. They call the teleological argument. The teleological, which stands for design, the argument from design. or fine-tuning of the universe. So when you start to look at the universe and you see this, so, is this something that was produced by wind, rain, and time? It's because we instinctively know, we recognized design, we recognize where intelligence has been involved. So, when we walk and we're seeing this, we go, man, check what the wind did over like millions of years. Is this something that water that was produced through water and erosion? When you find pots in the ground and you find tools that were made, they're indicative of intelligence. That these were not produced by natural forces, but there was an intelligent mind behind this. And are these just lines? When you look at paintings and lines, you can't see it very clearly there, but like paintings on walls and things like that. Is that just made by natural means on a cave wall? So the reality is that we instinctively recognize marks of intelligence. And no reasonable person would conclude that Mount Rushmore was produced by natural means. Arrowheads, cave paintings, they all happen by natural means. Just as much as somebody walking through a jungle and you find like a watch lying on the thing, or you find a computer, go, man, check what the wind and the rain did over billions of years. It's got like, Dell written on the front. Wonder what happened there. That was a bit of water that like, or something, We know how to differentiate intelligent causes. In fact, yes. So the whole SETI program is designed around the fact that we recognize intelligence. SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So we can't trust our own brains to recognize intelligence and from an intelligent source that we can differentiate between the noise coming off of planets and an intelligent signal. Why are they pouring billions into this? But the thing is that what happens is that a supernatural cause is excluded in a priori fashion. So in other words, what they do is that when they come to examine, this is secular science, when they come to examine the evidence, they are not allowed to come to any supernatural cause. They have to explain it materially. So they exclude supernaturalism as a possible cause before they even begin. Even if all the evidence screams that this was made by an intelligent designer, it's already not even an option. It's not a possibility. And so when archaeologists discover an arrowhead pot, Mount Rushmore, they tell it must have been designed, even though they didn't see the designer. They haven't seen the designer, but they know somebody made this. As I've said, SETI, the whole program, is based on that. And yet, the materialistic bias of many evolutionists mean that they reject an intelligent source for the literally encyclopedic information carried in every living cell. And so even Richard Dawkins admits that the message is found in just the cell nucleus. And if you unpack that, the information found in just a single DNA strand is mind-blowing. Even just the cell nucleus of an amoeba, which is supposed to be the simplest life form on the planet, an amoeba, the information contained in just one of the cell nucleuses of the amoeba is more than all 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Just soak that in for a second. You got an amoeba. That's really dwarf. It just lies there, It's not really intelligent. It doesn't look like it, but the thing's alive somehow. And it's just in the cell nucleus, in one cell nucleus, just in the nucleus, there's more information in there than the entire 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. How's that? The entire amoeba itself has as much information in its DNA as 1,000 complete sets. This is our simplest life form. And what's important to understand about this is not data. This is information. This is organized data. So data, okay, we'll look at that just now. The difference between data and information is data is just random letters. It's like the alphabet. B, F, G, Z, A, B. It doesn't make any sense. It's not organized. But when that data gets organized, you end up with a book that is readable and it makes sense. And somebody put that together. And this is what DNA is like. It's information that instructs your body how to make things. Richard Dawkins says this: what lies at the heart of every living thing is not a fire, warm breath, nor a spark of life. It is information. And we'll see a little bit of that now. It's words, it's instructions in your body right now. There's information in your body telling you how to breathe. There's information telling your cells how to form, how to make your blood flow, how your brain works, how everything. It's all coming and was all formed from instruction from DNA in your body. And it's instructions. Think of 1 billion discrete digital characters. If you want to understand life, think about information technology. In other words, programs, software design. You've got zeros and ones, eh? Everything turns into machine code, and then you've got bits, these bytes, characters, and machine code, and the sequence of, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, does something different to 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. You know what I mean? And how you arrange your zeros and ones gives different instructions to your computer. This is how DNA works in our bodies. And so this is the difference between data and information. And what exists inside our bodies and in every living thing is what's on the right. It's ordered information so that when your body is forming, your nose doesn't grow out your bum cheek, because that would be bad. Or, you know what I mean? That your body knows. It's like as you're forming. I mean, my wife can tell you, she's a nurse, a midwife. And when you watch a baby forming, it starts as just a single cell. It gets fertilized, 23 chromosomes. With 23 chromosomes from the man they love? Is it 23? Or is it 28? I can't remember. They come together and the egg's fertilized and then it starts to multiply. And as it's multiplying, the DNA inside there says, all right, put the heart here. This is how you make a heart. And it starts forming the heart, starts forming the brain, starts making the skeleton. This is all governed and directed by information inside the DNA in the cells that tell you, put the arm here, and you check a little arm starting to grow out, fingernails, your immune system, your circulatory system, everything in you, your reproductive system is designed by DNA, information. Hey? So I've just read this book, so I'm like super stoked about this. I want to do a whole evening on this and just talk about DNA. But Francis Collins wrote a brilliant book, actually, called The Language of God, where he's the head of the Genome Project in America. And he actually converted. He was an atheist, and he converted to Christianity based on his studies of DNA. And actually, a lot of scientists have converted to Christianity. As they look deeper and deeper into it, they go, it's not possible that this came by chance. It's not possible. And he says, as Francis Collins says, at first approximation, one can therefore think of DNA as an instructional script, a software program, sitting in the nucleus of every cell. Its coding language has 4 letters or 2 bits in computer terms. A particular instruction known as a gene is made up of hundreds or thousands of letters of code that tell your body how to grow and how to function. Hey? So when you look at DNA, you'll see there's 4. I'm going to get into this next year, but I can't do it tonight because it's not the topic. But I want to just say something about this. Is that you've got 4 letters. So in computer programming language, you've got 2 bits. You've got 2. You've got zeros and ones. In DNA, you've got 4. You've got the G, T, A, C. G being guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. And those 4, and the positioning of those 4 in your DNA sequence determine how your proteins are formed and how they fold. I'll mention a little bit about that now. But actually, these things are different lengths, and you'll see, and I'm going to show us a video about the copy process of DNA and how it actually works, because it's actually mind-blowing when you start to see how these things actually copy. Messenger RNA copies the DNA. In the double helix, what happens is this actually unwraps in a protein, a specialized protein in your cell, that actually it unwinds it. And then in the middle of this was discovered by Watson and Crick back in the 50s, I think, and 60s. They discovered the double helix, and then a few years later, Crick discovered the information-bearing qualities in DNA, which was this, that it unwraps and these things pull apart, and inside there are the actual instructions. And what happens is that the messenger RNA comes and actually reads the information sitting on there. So it reads like G, C, C, A, and then it goes off, and the next messenger RNA comes in, C, A, T, and then it reads that and goes off, and it just builds up, and that all heads off to the ribosomes, where that instructional set gets put onto and built in like a conveyor system where it starts to build proteins. And these proteins then are formed. It tells you the sequence to put your amino acids in, and this begins to form your proteins. And out the other side of ribosomes, you see these proteins coming out. And because of the shape, sorry, I'm looking this way a lot. Because if one of those things are not in the right place, your protein can't fold properly. It can't fold, which means it can't function, and it dies, and the whole cell will die. And so it's very important that the DNA tells them how to actually do this. And what happens is that it folds into proteins, and these proteins go off to this other protein in your cell that takes this protein and it bends it into its shape, and then that goes off. And the next protein comes and it bends it into its shape. And if one thing's out, it can't bend. It's like if something's not there, it doesn't bend right, it gets discarded. And then what happens is that some of these proteins self-function, and they have jobs that they do in the cell. Some of these fit actually together like Lego. So if something's wrong, it can't fit with the other proteins it needs to form molecular machines. And there's little molecular machines made up of these proteins that all fit together that actually function in your body on how to do it, and how your immune system works, how your blood works. Hey? How did all of that just happen by chance? It's not possible. And what's interesting now is that each of those little proteins that are reading the DNA have to be made by DNA, proteins that tell the thing how to make it. So how does this all happen in a progressive manner? They all have to exist at the same time. They can't just come into existence sporadically, because then everything would just die. For a cell to live, all those things need to exist in place at the same time, or the cell dies. Life cannot begin by itself. That's why they call it the law of biogenesis. In other words, life only comes from life. So again, when you look at DNA, you'll see. So chromosomes get unwrapped, they get pulled apart, and then all those things get read. And these are the four bytes, and the sequence of those things actually determine what you're building. Are you building an arm? Are you building fingernails? Are you making hair? I need some more of that. Are you making like immune system? Are you making a brain? Hey? Are you making blood? Are you making white blood cells ready? I mean, come on. How on earth did a female reproductive system develop independent of the male reproductive systems, and yet they work together? How? It's almost like the processes that were building and developing the female reproductive system had to know how the male side was working, to be able to, Okay. All right, let's watch this. This is actually from Signature in the Cell. Let's watch. That's the book.
In 1957, Francis Crick first proposed that chemicals called bases along the spine of the DNA molecule function as alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in a machine code. This animation shows how this digital information directs protein synthesis. First, a large protein complex separates the tightly wound strands of the DNA to prepare it to be copied. During this process of transcription, a protein complex called a polymerase produces a single-stranded copy of the original instructions. Here we see this copy, a messenger RNA molecule, being constructed inside the polymerase as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. Now we see the polymerase in action from the outside as it spits out the messenger RNA transcript. Next, this RNA transcript approaches and passes through a molecular machine called the nuclear pore complex, an information recognition device that controls the flow of information in and out of the cell's nucleus. Now we see the genetic assembly instructions on the messenger RNA approaching and arriving at a two-part chemical factory called a ribosome, the site of protein synthesis. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. During translation, a mechanical assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids in accord with the instructions on the transcript. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell by molecules called transfer RNAs, which link specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids. The sequential arrangement of the amino acids determines the type of protein constructed. When the construction of the chain is complete, it is transported to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape required to perform its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is released into the outer cytoplasm to do its job in the cell.
How insane is that, eh? So inside your body right now, there is information. There's a programming language inside you that is telling your body how to function, how to do stuff, how to make. Where did that information come from? It's one of the biggest downfalls and the biggest obstacles to the evolution theory and to the origin of life theory where is the mechanism that encodes DNA? Where is it? There is no naturalistic encoding mechanism to encode DNA, and there has to be that. And if you think about it, if life all came from a single organism millions of years ago, billions, a few billion years ago, then how did information get added to it so that it would learn how to multiply? It would learn how to go from a single-celled organism to a multi-celled organism. How did it learn how to make feathers, how to make scales, how to build lungs? Where did the information come from? There is no naturalistic encoding mechanism. None. There is none. So where did it come from? Because that had to come from an intelligent source. When you are walking through the forest and you find a computer program or you find the 30 volumes of Britannica Encyclopedia and you start to open that up, you're not going to go like, whoa, check what the wind and rain and whatever did over billions of years. And this is precisely what happens when they investigate and they look at DNA. In fact, actually as I've said, a lot of scientists are starting to look at this and go, this is not possible that this happened by chance. There had to be an intelligent source behind this. So in a crux, that is the argument, the teleological argument from design. So Francis Collin goes on and he says, DNA is mathematically identical to a language. So what language has ever risen without an intelligent cause? Investigations of many organisms, from bacteria to humans, revealed that this genetic code by which information in DNA and RNA is translated into proteins that then fulfill functions in your body is universal in all known organisms. No Tower of Babel was to be allowed in the language of life. How deeply satisfying is the digital elegance of DNA? And I tell you, for me, as I've investigated this and read this and that, it's just, whoa, for me, it's cemented even more. The incredibleness of God and just that He made us. The Bible says that you've been fearfully and wonderfully made. And that verse carries new meaning for me as I've investigated this thing of how intelligent and how amazing God is, that He put all this actually together. Dean Kenyon, a biophysicist, said this: if science is based on experience, then science tells us that the message encoded in DNA must have originated from an intelligent cause. What kind of intelligent agent was it? On its own, science cannot answer this question. If it must leave it to religion and philosophy. So if science can tell you that this exists, science can tell you that, man, there's incredible intelligence in DNA, in living organisms. But it can't tell you who made it or who did it or why it was made. It says, but that should not prevent science from acknowledging evidences for an intelligent cause origin where it may exist. And often in the secular scientific world, they don't want to acknowledge intelligent causes of these things. So when you look at this, what we have on the left is the rose window at the York Minster. Can you guys see it? I mean, how beautiful is that? And yet nobody would argue that that was designed by an incredible artist. And you look at the right, you see the cross-section of the double helix of DNA. Far more intricate and beautiful. Eh? The cross-section of the double helix of DNA. I mean, how amazing is that? And that, where the scientific world would have us believe, or the secular scientific world would have us believe, was that just happened by chance. And what's interesting is when you look at some of the facts around DNA, is that one strand of human DNA, because we have trillions of cells within our body. We have trillions of cells. One strand of human DNA would require 1.5 gigs of data. That's how much information. I mean, what's 1.5 gigs of data? That's how many text files would it take to make 1.5 gigs of data, eh? I mean, one text file, I don't know. Well, what does a 1.5 gig text file look like? That's going to be billions and I don't know how many lines of letters that's going to have in it. But that is a serious, staggering amount of information in there. And these are words, instructions. That's one strand of human DNA, just one strand. There's many within your cells. And to store all the information within an entire human being is estimated at 150 zettabytes, or 150 trillion gigs of data. That's an estimate. That's what it's estimated. The biggest hard drive that we have, okay, this is as of 2015. We have bigger. I think we have one size bigger is 16 terabytes. That at that point was the biggest hard drive that existed, a 16 terabyte hard drive. So we were nowhere near being able to store the level of information that our body can store and our cells can store. And we're talking on a microscopic scale. Eh? This DNA is not visible. It's stored in a much smaller space than a hard drive. So let's watch this video, and he's going to talk about some of the mathematical.
Does evolution have
the mathematical probabilities that DNA and proteins and molecules could have formed by chance? So let's listen up here.
chance?
Christians are often challenged to provide evidence for the existence of a creator God. I believe one of those evidences comes in the area of mathematics, specifically probability. Now, probability is the measure of the likelihood that an event will occur. In other words, what we're talking about here is chance. What are the chances of an event to occur? Now, we use probabilities in many areas of our life. For example, probability is used in insurance companies. It's used in advertising companies. We see it all the time in gambling casinos. And it's also part of the evolutionary process. Now, here's the contrast we're talking about. The evolution worldview teaches, as a fact, that given enough time, molecules can evolve into a man. However, the Bible clearly teaches that God is the creator of all things. In other words, God created all life after its kind. So these two are in contrast. In other words, both of these cannot be true. I believe we can use the area of probability to help us determine which one, creation and evolution, better matches reality, or better matches what we actually observe out there. To do this, we'll use the origin of life, the first living cell. And to help illustrate this, we'll use just one of the components of a cell called a protein. Now, proteins are made up of what we call amino acids. Amino acids bond together to make biological proteins. So what we need to look at are the parameters that are involved in the formation of a single protein. And that will help us understand some of the probabilities involved in getting a single living cell. Now, one of these parameters is called the type of amino acids that are used in making proteins. There's over 300 different types of amino acids out there, but only 20 are used in life. That means life is very selective. If we get one of these wrong amino acids, the protein may not function properly. It can be very damaging to our bodies. A second probability problem deals with the shape of the amino acids. Amino acids come in two shapes. We call them left-handed amino acids and right-handed amino acids. And like our hands, they are mirror images of each other. Now here's the problem. Only left-handed amino acids are used in life. Right-handed ones are not used in life. So there's a second probability problem. The third problem deals with the order. These amino acids cannot be lined up in just any random order. They have to be in a very specific order so that protein can fold a specific way and perform its function. So the three problems we have here, number one, we can only use 20 of the over 300 amino acids that are available. Of those 20, we can only use the left-handed versions. And then they all must be in the correct order or that protein may not function properly. Now, the human body is made up of all these cells which are made up of proteins. Proteins come in various sizes. They range in size from about 50 amino acids to over 30,000 amino acids. Now, if we were to take just a very small protein, say a protein of about 100 amino acids, I'm going to ask, what is the probability of that very small protein occurring by random chance processes? That probability would be 1 in 10 to the 130th power. That's 1 followed by 130 zeros. To help illustrate that immensity of that problem, if we were to flip a coin and we wanted to get heads all the time, for example, we wanted to flip a coin and get heads 100 times in a row, what would be that probability? How often would we have to flip that coin? In order to achieve this, we'd have to flip that coin 300 million times a second for over 1 quadrillion years. That's an immense problem for evolution to overcome, just to get a protein of 100 amino acids. Now, the human body is made up of about 60 trillion cells. How long would it take to assemble 60 trillion cells at 1 per minute? And that turns out to be about 114 million years. But that doesn't account for getting them in the right order. If we had to get them all in the right order, that would far surpass the evolutionary time frame of billions and billions of years. Now, when we go back to the human body, it is a tremendously complex organ, tremendously complex. For example, in our human body, we have about 40 billion capillaries. Those are the smallest of the blood vessels. If we were to take all those capillaries and line them all up, that would be about 25,000 miles long. We also have a heart that beats about 100,000 times a day. We have red blood cells that transport oxygen to our body. We have white blood cells that identify enemy agents in our body. We have eyes and ears that are more complex than any man-made machine. And we have a brain that has about 100 trillion connections in it. Now, if we were to take all 60 trillion of these cells and look at the probability of assembling all 60 trillion of these cells to form all these very specific complex organs that all interwork together in the evolutionary time frame of 3.8 billion years, I think that probability would be beyond our comprehension. I believe that probability is a wonderful tool for showing that there indeed exists an all-powerful, all-knowing Creator God who tells us we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and also tells us in Romans 1:19 and 20 that He has given us all the evidence for a Creator God, and we have no excuse.
All right. So we'll get more into DNA next year. When we hit the science part next year, we're going to have a return. We'll be getting into as I said, the creation sciencey part. We've got 10 minutes, so I'm just going to wrap up this. I just want to talk a little bit about fine-tuning under this teleological argument, because our universe is extremely fine-tuned for life, which is also a major argument for that the universe was designed. So, when you look at the universe, they actually say, they talk about the Goldilocks effect, is that our universe is so tuned and designed for life and there's so many parameters that have to be 100% correct. If they were just slightly altered, life would not be possible. And they call this the fine-tuning, or and they call it anticipatory design. Or they call it the anthropic principle. That's also one of the other scientific terms, the anthropic principle. And what it does is it purposes that the fundamental constants and quantities in nature are really, really finely tuned. that if these quantities were altered by even a little bit, that the balance for life in the universe and on the earth would be upset, and it actually could not exist. And it argues that the naturalistic proposal of time, matter, and change is insufficient to explain these conditions that we find that support life. So some examples of this is that if oxygen currently makes up about 21% of our atmosphere, and if it was 25% of the atmosphere, fires would erupt everywhere, and life would not be possible. And if it were 15%, humans would suffocate. And it's very precisely set up in the atmosphere so that life can actually live here. If gravity were altered by that much, I can't remember how many zeros that is, but if it was altered by that much of a percent, the sun would not exist and the moon would crash into the earth. So that is a seriously fine-tuned quantity in the universe. If the centrifugal force of planetary movement, centrifugal force speaks about that if you think about that, the planets are flying around the sun. And so when you are flying around something, think of a merry-go-round. Which way do you want to go? You want to go out, eh? The faster you spin, the more you got to hold on to actually stay there, eh? Because it just wants to chuck you outwards. So these things are planning. So the gravitational force between the sun and the planets has to be perfectly matched with the pull of it spinning around, wanting to take it outwards to keep it in its orbit around the earth and the moon around the sun. So that has to be so perfectly tuned. Otherwise, all the planets would just fly into space. And there'd be nothing there. Or gravity would be too strong and they'd start to move inwards and we'd all end up in the sun. So that's what they call the centrifugal force. So if the centrifugal force of planetary moments was not precise, nothing could be held in orbit around the sun. If the Earth was expanding at a rate 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it is, the temperature on Earth would be 10,000 degrees. We'd be expanding too slowly. If Jupiter were not exactly where it is, they've actually found that Jupiter's position is actually so finely tuned because it protects the Earth from bombardment from space material. Jupiter takes about 98% of the hits of asteroids that would have come into our orbit. If the thickness of the Earth's crust was greater, too much oxygen would be transferred into the crust to support life. If it was thinner, volcanic and tectonic plates would make life impossible. And these are all fine-tuned things in our universe that kind of, they seem to indicate that this thing was tuned for life. The axis of the Earth was set very carefully. So if the axis of the Earth was altered, even slightly, the surface temperatures of the Earth would be too great. Water vapor, if the water vapor in the atmosphere were greater than they are now, runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to go out of control. If it was less, then life would die out. Insufficient greenhouse effect would make the Earth too cold to support life. There's a bunch of others. For example, if the Earth was 5% closer to the sun, the oceans would boil. If we were, 2% further away or 5% further away from an orbit perspective, the oceans would freeze over. The tilt of the Earth affects seasons. If it were different, summers would be much hotter, winters would be colder. Our sun is the right color. It's a yellow sun. If it were a red sun, we'd have problems. If it were redder or bluer, photosynthetic response would be weaker, so plants couldn't grow. Our sun is the right mass. If it were larger, its brightness would be too much. It would change too quickly, and there would be too much light energy, etc., guys. We can go on. There's many of these. The Earth's distance from the sun is important as I said, for a stable water cycle. Without a sufficient amount of water, life could not exist. This is why when they're looking for planets out there, they're looking for planets with water, because water is so important for life. I don't know why I'm saying water. The atmosphere. So not only must a planet have an atmosphere, it must have the right percentage of gases in the atmosphere. Otherwise, life's not possible, because then we have too much methane. We have too much. You look at the atmospheres of Jupiter and Saturn and some of these other planets, they can't support life. On Earth, the air we breathe is 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1% argon, carbon dioxide. Without the 78% nitrogen to blanket the combustion of oxygen, our world would burn up from oxidation. So the 78% nitrogen is critical. And that's also very important when it comes to looking at carbon dating, because the sun's rays hit nitrogen, which convert it into carbon-14. That's how the whole carbon dating process works, which we'll talk about next year. Eh? I know we're all keen. I'm tempted, but I must resist that temptation. Also, exactly where we are in the galactic center of our solar system is perfect. If we were too close in, the Earth would be annihilated. We're in a very protected, very unbusy part of our solar system, which is awesome. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross has calculated that the odds of all anthropic constants and quantities, which are about 122 at the last count, I think there may be a few more now, to be in place on any planet in the universe by luck alone, to be one chance in 10 to 138 zeros after it. And the law of probability, they say, is 10 to the power of 50. 1 in 10 to the power of 50. Once you get beyond that, you've gone beyond the realm of chance. And this number becomes even more incredible. So the chances of these things being there by chance alone is 1 in 10 to the 138th power. And when you think about that, this number becomes even more incredible when one realizes there are only 10 to the power of 70 atoms in the whole universe. So 10 to the power of 138, that's a big number. There's no chance that this all happened by chance alone. Okay, we're not going to get to that argument. So I've gone through 2 arguments. I know I said 3, but we've run out of time. The third one, which is the argument from morality, I encourage you to go and read up about it. Basically, it talks about the fact that we have objective moral values and duties for life. You know, there's a sense in all of us of there's this ought to in us, you know. It's like we ought to do the right thing. We ought to do. Where does that come from? There's certain things that every one of us would agree is always wrong. Why is it wrong? Who says it's wrong? It's wrong according to who? And so the moral argument explores that avenue and starts to unpack that. Maybe I'll hit that one in one of them next year, we'll do that in one night. And there are a bunch of other arguments. If you guys have been interested in this, we can't cover everything in these things, but I'm also trying to whet your appetite. There's the ontological argument for God's existence. There's a whole bunch that I haven't even mentioned. And if you're wanting to find out more about this, there's some excellent books. You can just get hold of admin at oxygenlife.co.za. Sorry, Adele. And you can just all come chat to me. And I'd love to just direct you to some really good resources where you can read up about this, or if you want to chat some more, you can speak to me. And I just want to say, just in ending, if there's anyone here or anyone listening online, on YouTube, and you don't know Jesus at all, and tonight you've been listening about these arguments, maybe you've not believed in God, and tonight some of this is just broken through some of your arguments, and the Bible teaches that God exists. The Bible teaches that God came in His Son Jesus, and we looked last year very much at the fact that Jesus did exist, but He came in His Son Jesus to die on a cross for our sin. He came to rescue you from your sin so that you could know the one who created you. And as we've unpacked some of these tonight, maybe tonight you are wanting to just respond even just to the gospel and to the Lord's and to God's invitation for us. Because, knowledge leads us into a place of accountability. That now if we are believing that maybe God does exist, firstly I want to encourage you, if tonight you're not wanting to respond, to explore this further. The Bible, I don't think the Bible says this, but it's a true statement. I think it's been made. A principle is that a righteous person always searches for the truth, and that you would continue to seek out the truth, and or get hold of somebody, get hold of the church office if you're wanting to chat more. But And if you're wanting to give your heart to the Lord, or you're wanting to find out more about Jesus, or how do you become a Christian, then we've got some excellent resources that we'd love to make available to you. But if you're out there and you're saying, I actually want to surrender my heart to the Lord tonight, I'd love to pray with you. And if there's anyone here tonight and you've come into this place and you don't know Jesus, and you tonight are wanting to say, you've just been even maybe convinced by this, it's, God has not called us into a place of knowledge. He's called us into a place of relationship with himself. And that he's wanting you to actually know him, not just know about him. And that we come to know him through giving our lives and surrendering our hearts and putting our faith and our trust in him. And that I would encourage you tonight to come speak to me. Speak to me after this tonight. Don't leave this place. And I'd love to pray with you. But I want to quickly pray that if you're out there and you don't know the Lord, and tonight you're wanting to give your heart to him, I'd love to pray with you tonight. And so if you are, let's close our eyes, man, and let's just trust the Lord. Just for anyone that might be listening out there, that tonight you're saying, I want to give my heart to Jesus tonight. He died for you. He loves you. And man, he wants to bring you into a relationship with him. So if that is you, then I encourage you just to get onto your knees where you are. It's just a sign of humility before God and saying, God, I want to come to you. And then just pray with me. Just say this after me, or with me. Lord Jesus, I thank you for speaking to my heart tonight. God, I've been rebellious against you. But Lord, tonight I want to surrender my life to you. Tonight, God, I want you to be my God, and I want to be your child. And I pray tonight that you would come into my life. I pray, Lord, that you would change me, and that, Jesus, you would be my Lord and my Savior. Please forgive me for all my sin. Forgive me for all my rebellion. And accept me tonight as your child. Thank you for dying on the cross for me, so that I could become your child. So, Lord, tonight, I surrender all that I am to you. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So I want to encourage you, if you're out there and you prayed that prayer tonight, to please don't sit on your laurels. Get hold of somebody that you know is a Christian, or you're welcome to contact the Oxygen Life Church office. And we'll love to put you in touch with somebody that can just speak to you more about where to from here. And again tonight, guys, thanks for being here. I trust it's been helpful. That we'll get more into some more stuff next year. But I trust tonight has been faith building and helpful. And bless you guys. Go well.
To the cross I look, and to the cross I cling. Of its suffering I do drink, of its work I do sing. On it my Savior